Hey, South Campus. This past Monday, Emily talked about like submitting to our parents and what does that look like? And before that, Ryan talked about submitting to others and how does that look like? And I want to touch on submitting to those who are put in authority over us and those put in authority under us, and how do we submit in those kind of relationships? It's going to come from an interesting passage, but go ahead and go to Ephesians 6 with me and go to verse 5, and we're going to read verses 5 through 9. And it says, "Bondservants, obey your earthly masters with fear and trembling, with a sincere heart, as you would for Christ, not by the way of eye service as people pleasers, but as a bondservant of Christ, doing the will of God from the heart, rendering a service with a good will as to the Lord and not to man, knowing whatever good anyone does, this he will receive back from the Lord. Whether he's a bondservant or free, masters, do the same to them. And stop your threatening, knowing that he is both their master and yours in heaven, and that there's no partiality with him." Okay, this seems weird, and it's talking about, slaves and masters, and it's like, okay, wait, how are you getting into the whole who's putting authority over us or put under authority, our authority? But to understand that, you kind of have to understand the whole context of what's happening and why Paul's talking about bondservants and masters. See, they were part of the Ephesian family, just dynamic. It was natural to see a family with a servant. And that word right there, bondservant, is actually someone who is hired on for a certain amount of years to work off a debt they owed or get some kind of wage that the master is saving for them. And so he's talking about that relationship of that person who is in authority over them, and how is that bondservant who now follows Jesus supposed to treat, and how are they supposed to work for that master of theirs? And it says to do as you would for Christ. It's to work as if you're for Christ. This is going to sound funny, but I can't help but think of school in this situation. If a professor in college said, "Oh, hey, you only need 3 sources," I only had 3 sources. If they said the paper only needed to be 2 pages, it was only 2 pages. Whatever I could to skirt on by and to please the professor is what I did. But what Paul is saying here is to work as if you're working for the Lord, or to give it your all, to give it your best, and to not just skirt on by or just to please that person, but to give it your all and to give it your best, because you're working for the Lord when you are working for them. And so, guys, when you're under the authority of like a teacher, don't just skirt on by and try to do whatever to please them, but do it as if you're working for anybody and everybody. A lot of the times this passage now gets translated to the work environment. So those who work might get this, but at Starbucks, my second job, I'm not just doing it to please my higher ups or my managers, my shift manager or whatnot, but I'm working my tail off so that they can see like, hey, I'm just doing this because I believe it's the right thing to do, and because I'm working for the Lord. Me serving coffee is me serving the Lord. As weird as that sounds, me doing a pour over is me pouring out my love for Christ. And so me doing that and giving my all in my situation, being under the authority of somebody else, is me showing that love and resubmitting to Christ in that. But then it gets to the masters and it says, do the same to them, or to work as if you're working for the Lord. And how that plays out is here it says to stop your threatening. The Ephesians had a culture, at least in that they would, I guess there was some threatening or some threats of violence against these slaves. And Paul's saying like, no, don't do that. That's not what you're supposed to do. But you're supposed to treat them as a fellow brother. Like, hey, his master, your bondservant's master is not you, but the one in heaven. And that master is also your master. So treat him as if y'all have the same master and that y'all are working as for the Lord together. So how do you submit to those who are in authority over you and those who are under your authority? As if you're working for the Lord. So giving in your all and showing no partiality, because like verse 9 says, there's no partiality with Jesus, and there's no partiality with God. He doesn't matter if you're in authority or if you're under somebody else's authority. All that matters is that we work for the Lord and that we are giving it our all, no matter what. So I know y'all are in this weird season, but try to give it your all when we get back into that new normal that we're coming into. Love y'all. Miss y'all. Can't wait to see y'all.